J'ouvre maintenant la séance.
I now open the session. Welcome to meeting number 37 of the Standing Committee on Transport Infrastructure and Communities. Pursuant to Standing Order 1082 and the motion adopted by the committee on Thursday, February 3rd, 2022, the committee is meeting to study anticipated labour shortages in the Canadian transportation sector. Today's meeting is taking place in a hybrid format pursuant to the House of Order of November 25th, 2021. Members are attending in person in the room and remotely using the Zoom application.
Appearing before us as witnesses via video conference in the first hour from the National Supply Chain Task Force, Monsieur Jean Gattuso, Task Force Co-Chair, as well as Louise Yacco, Task Force Co-Chair. In the second half, from 5:30 to 6:30, we have from the Department of Citizenship and Immigration, Jean-Marc Guionnet, Director General, Immigration Program Guidance, Ian Gillespie, Director, Temporary Resident Policy and Programs. From the Department of Employment and Social Development, Mr. Andrew Brown, Senior Assistant Deputy Minister, Skills and Employment Branch, Mr. Michael McPhee, Assistant Deputy Minister, Temporary Foreign Workers Program, and Mr. Brian Hickey, Director General, Temporary Foreign Workers Program. And finally, from the Department of Transport, we have Ms. Melanie Vanstone, Director General, Multimodal and Road Safety Programs. Before we begin, I'd like to take this opportunity to inform members that all of today's
Mr. Chair,
participants have completed the necessary audio-visual checks. We will now begin the opening remarks with the National Supply Chain Task Force for 5 minutes. The floor is yours.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. It's a pleasure to be speaking to you today. Monsieur Gattuso, and I would like to thank the committee for the opportunity to speak about the Supply Chain Task Force's report. We're proud of the work that the task force did over its 100-day mandate. Our objective was to provide independent advice through recommendations on actions aimed to increase competition, access, reliability, resiliency, redundancy, efficiency, and investment in the national transportation supply chain, while also promoting continued international transportation services to and from Canada. The recommendations developed are based on the perspectives shared by industry through consultation and written submissions. We were also guided by the principle of creating a transportation supply chain that would be governed and operated in the best interests of the country, given Canada's reliance on international trade for our prosperity. With respect to the objective of the TRAN committee, today we will share what we heard from industry about the labor shortage impacting the national transportation supply chain and the recommendations related to addressing these challenges that we provided to the Minister of Transport in our final report. One of the key structural issues identified through our consultations with industry is that the transportation sector is facing acute labor shortages. While this is an issue for all transportation modes, they are particularly problematic for the rail and trucking sectors. To give some perspective on the scale of this issue, as noted by the Conference Board of Canada, the transportation sector is more reliant on older workers compared to the total economy, and more than 260,000 of its workers will be retiring in the next 20 years. Moreover, from 2021 to 2030, the number of workers joining the transportation workforce will be insufficient to offset the losses from retirees. The transportation sector relies inordinately on immigrants, and its current workforce is predominantly male. We heard that the labor issues facing our supply chain system are complex and cannot be tied to a single broken cog in the system. A mismatch between available and required skills, lack of appropriate training programs, and insufficient training funding were consistently raised as significant concerns by various supply chain representatives. They also mentioned lack of awareness of certain occupations as being particularly problematic. Labor shortages are a pressing issue across all sectors. We have seen that when the transportation sector is not functioning properly, products do not make their way to consumers, materials do not make their way to producers, and notably the follow-on impacts affect all Canadians. A key example of this dysfunction is that 50% of our trade is dependent on trucking, and we are missing more than 25,000 drivers. Further, there is not a collective view that trucking is a skilled trade, which dissuades potential candidates and impacts training funding. Trucking is just one example where the system is not set up to effectively attract and retain talent. Jean, I think you're on mute.
Chaîne d'approvisionnement fiable et efficace.
A reliable and efficient supply chain is critical to the economic well-being of our country. The transport sector is responsible for facilitating trade, which comprised 61% of Canada's GDP in 2021, a year in which the supply chain suffered significant reductions in service due to human-caused mischief and natural disasters. Regardless of the advancements being made through automation and artificial intelligence, stakeholders believe labor will continue to be a limiting factor for a reliable and efficient supply chain unless drastic measures are taken. To respond to these issues, we have consistently heard that collaboration among all levels of government and the private sector should be prioritized to better understand labor market needs across the country and to meet current and future workforce requirements. Collaboration between the public and private sectors was seen as an opportunity to advance and promote education and skills training in supply chain-related occupations. This collaboration would also have to involve provinces and territories, as education and training fall under their jurisdiction.
The struggle and suggestion from industry, our final report contained both immediate actions and long-term recommendations that reflect what we heard. In the short term, within 2 years, we have recommended that the government develop a transportation supply chain labor strategy to identify current issues and develop long-term and lasting solutions. Additionally, we have brought forward other immediate actions the government could pursue to provide some immediate relief, including the federal government seek to expand existing labor programs and examine a way to attract underrepresented groups, continue to support, if possible, expand the temporary foreign workers program on an urgent basis as it applies to workers in the transportation supply chain, expedite refugees and immigration processing for those eligible to work in supply chain related business, and finally, support organization and business to help acclimatize new Canadian to Canadian work and social environments. Looking to the long term, we recommend that the government finalize the transportation supply chain labor strategy and at a minimum include direction related to immigration, domestic labor participation, refugees, training and education, productivity, and automation. The strategy should reinforce the government's willingness to adapt policies, remove barriers, provide adequate training, embrace collaboration, promote continuous growth and upskilling of our workforce, and invest in our business to take advantage of technology. Notre rapport final fournit les détails supplémentaires sur.
Our final report provides further details on each recommendation and the nuances of the problems faced by the supply chain system.
Is only a single component of our final report. We'd like to thank you for giving us the time to share our findings on the matter and look forward to any of your questions you may have. Thank you.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur Gattuso, and thank you very much, Ms. Yako, for your opening remarks. We'll begin our line of questioning with Mr. Genereux. Mr. Genereux, the floor is yours. You have 6 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and good to be back and see everybody at Transport Committee. Really appreciate you guys showing up. Just wanted to ask a quick question out of the gate. There are 13 immediate recommendations. Of those 13, during your press conference and subsequent media interviews, there's been a lot of comments, particularly by you, Ms. Yako, that they're urgent. Of those 13, have you seen action on all 13 so far from the government?
Well, we submitted our report early in October, and the government has no responsibility to report back to Jean and I. So,
any chance you've witnessed? Sorry to interrupt. I only have a limited amount of time. Have you witnessed it? I imagine you're still paying attention and closely monitoring the what's happened from your report.
Yeah, I'm aware that that Transport Canada has asked for submissions from stakeholders, but I've not been watching this particularly closely.
Okay,
so I
perfect.
Comment.
Thank you. I'll move on. The road in the report it states that roadblocks to private sector innovation must be removed. We must ensure that governments do not place barriers that could stifle this type of much-needed innovation. So one of the recommendations of the report is to create the supply chain office, and the majority of the task force recommendations focus on government intervention versus getting government out of the way. So I ask the question, hopefully you can provide some insight on it. Do you really think that we need to create the new office that will obviously cost taxpayers more and will likely lead to more Ottawa interference?
I can see that Jean is answering.
I'm there, Louise. Okay. Regarding, I'll take over this question. First, going back to government, okay, you saw in the last few days, government's taking a position on immigration. So that's going to be one thing that we were pushing in our report when we were talking about labor. We heard it from the stakeholder, we need more immigration. Going back to your question on the supply chain office, and when you look at what we lost in the last 10 years in terms of share trade in the world, especially with US, 3 points of share point, okay, you can easily pay the supply chain office, and we'll get results. When you start losing share, you need immediate action. The objective of the chain office is also making sure that within different departments of the government, there's KPI that are oriented to supply chain. Because we are one of the basic thing in this report is that you saw that the trade is important, it's 61% of GDP. So if we start losing share,
sorry, I'm going to interrupt.
Canadian will be affected by that.
Thanks, Mr. Gattuso. I want to interrupt. And first of all, I probably should start with commending you guys on the report. There's a lot of hard work and a lot of time put into this report. But the one stickler that I keep hearing about is the supply chain office. There was I spoke with somebody today that said they're unsure of how more government bureaucracy will continue to help the problem. They looked further down the road that this will actually be an additional burden. So that's the concern, at least, that I'm hearing. So I'm going to move on to my next question, but if there's more to add to that, Mr. Gattuso, I'd welcome you to chime in. So we're seeing, obviously, like the railways and ports are owned and operated by the private sector, and I guess an outcome that's seeing from your report that there seems to be more incentivization from the government for the creation of additional rail lines and ports. Is that a fair comment to say? And perhaps maybe we'll start with you, Ms. Yako, on if that's your interpretation of what you heard.
We heard that physical infrastructure certainly is required, but it's not physical infrastructure alone that is going to solve our supply chain issues. It is going to be additional cooperation between private sectors and government. And to go back to your earlier question about the supply chain office, there is a need for better federal coordination amongst the departments. Because there are a number of federal departments that touch and affect supply chain operations, that have policies that affect supply chains, and that there's currently a lack of coordination. So rather than an additional layer of bureaucracy, we see the supply chain office as actually cutting through some of that bureaucracy, taking over potentially responsibility, so that there's not an add-on effect necessarily, but more efficiency in how those regulations that affect supply chains are both developed, monitored, and managed.
I think, Mr. Gattuso, you want to get in on the supply chain office?
Just to add up to Louis' comment, it is key every the department are touching many departments are touching the supply chain, and they play a role in it. If you talk about the borders as an example, CFIA, they all have, that's key for them, that we put also KPIs in their performance, because the supply chain office really bring together all the KPIs, and also making sure that because we are a trader country, we need also to continue to grow our business and maintain that our supply chain. Don't remember, our project was to have an efficient and fluid supply chain. That was our mandate. So we came out with this recommendation. It's key in our report.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur Gattuso.
Thank you very much, Mr. Gattuso.
Mr. Rogers, the floor is yours. You have 6 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and certainly thank you to the witnesses appearing today. It's good to have you here. First of all, I should commend you on some great work in your report, certainly, and the long-term and short-term recommendations as to we try to resolve the supply chain issues. We've heard from many different witnesses over the last number of meetings from all sectors of the transportation corridors, the airline industry, marine, trucking, and all the people that are involved in moving goods and services for our country. I just want to ask you this question. Either one of you feel free to comment on the questions that I ask. In your view, after all the work you've done, is the shortage of truck drivers the biggest problem in the transportation sector, or do you see other shortages as equally problematic? And if so, which ones?
You want to go, Louise, or?
Go ahead.
Okay, we identify, trucking, 50% of our trade depend on trucking. So immediately, if we're missing 25,000 drivers, trucking is key. Then, if 23% is maritime, so it's to have labor in port. 12% is rail, but you just take rail and trucking, you have 62% of our trade that depend on those. So those sectors are key. If we want to be, don't forget, to be for this country, we for our internal and external customer, look at this country as being a big plant. You need to service internal and external customer. And our external customer, if we don't give them service, okay, they won't buy anymore from Canada. So we need to make sure that not only from the plant to the port or to US, we need to meet requirement of our customer. And if we're delayed weeks and weeks, people will not buy anymore from Canada. And we heard things like that from the stakeholder. We met people are talking about their customer, and in US, US are also challenging us because we spend 1 week in the US about the type of service that Canada is giving.
Ms. Jacques, what did you want to?
So I think what you're trying to, I think your question is there a ranking in terms of the shortages for the particular modes? And while Jean is absolutely correct, we have a very significant shortage in truck drivers. Each of the modes serves a specific purpose, and each of the modes identified labor shortages as being critical. So I wouldn't necessarily rank one over the other. I'd say they're all very significant and all critical and necessary to be filled.
So given your comment there, can you comment on recent changes to the temporary foreign workers program? And do you think this will help address labor shortages in the transportation sector?
The temporary foreign worker program is designed for temporary shortages. And by definition, the shortages that we are talking about are long-term and significant and require a permanent solution. So while the temporary foreign workers increase may provide some a short-term bridge, we require a much longer-term perspective on labor shortages.
Don't forget, if you talk about just drivers, you need to train them. it's a process, and the profession of a driver is not recognized right now as a profession. When we're going to add something, you saw in our report, we're pushing for program with federal and provinces to work together to develop. We need to train drivers. So for sure, these people who are coming in cannot be temporary. So therefore, it's key that we also get into this country with our immigration program drivers.
So the other question I had is, I'm just wondering about automation. Did you identify opportunities for greater automation to help deal with labor shortages? And if so, can you elaborate on that?
We didn't specifically identify situations where automation will be helpful, but clearly the fact that vehicle automation is a key area that is expanding. There may be some automation. The rail lines identified ways that they could automate inspections, for example, but there are regulations in place that prohibit them from doing that. There are opportunities that were identified by stakeholders. We didn't necessarily identify them specifically in the report.
But you're right, Louisa. Many stakeholders did talk about automation, but one area where it's well developed is like automatic warehouse right now. People are having a hard time to get lift truck drivers. So they're having automated. They're investing a lot of money for warehouses. But again, I doubt we're going to see 43 foot going on the highway without any driver these days. Right? So that's why we need drivers.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Before we move on to our next member of the committee, would it be possible, Ms. Yako and Mr. Gattuso, to mute your microphone after you're done speaking? It's just for our interpreters to make sure that there's no overlap. Thank you very much. Prochainement, nous avons Mr. Barcelou-Duval.
Next, Mr. Barcelou-Duval, over to you for 6 minutes. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Hello, Ms. Yako. Hello, Mr. Gattuso. I'd like to acknowledge the work you're doing. I think it's very important work. It's important to make sure that the supply chain is efficient. A lot of people have been talking to us about that in our ridings, and we're all suffering the consequences of that. So you've been focusing on this, and I thank you, and I wanted to highlight that. And of course, I hope that your recommendations will allow us to get better results. That being said, I noticed something when you spoke at the beginning. You referred to the question of training. You said that education falls within the province's jurisdiction, and there's professional associations that falls under the provinces as well. And there was mention of immigration. Well, economic immigration in Quebec is a provincial responsibility. So you're trying to balance all of these through your recommendations, and also that's part of the vision that you explained to us. Can you elaborate on that, please?
Sorry. Regardez, nous on a.
Well, listen. We met with stakeholders from all provinces. Well, we didn't meet with each and every one of them. We received their submissions, but we talk about a national problem. We need to get more workers. If we want to remain in business, as we say, we need people. We need people, and we need programs to support those people. There are, of course, there's the provincial and the federal jurisdiction. First, we want to identify the problem. Then we say, look, we have to zero in on training, work on that together, because the whole country is going to benefit from this. I think that should be the starting point. And a truck driver, well, his job is not recognized as an occupation per se. There aren't subsidies for this type of work. The training for for the transportation companies, well, they have to pay for it, or the truckers have to pay for it themselves. It's so important. And we do business with the Americans. We do billions of dollars in business with the Americans, and the road transportation mode is important. So we have to focus on these truckers. We have to work hand in hand. Our report is called ACT. You know, we talk about acting and transforming together. This is for the benefit of the future of our country. Thank you, Mr. Gattuso. What I wanted to clarify is that you have a working committee, and people shared their concerns and issues with you, and then from that, you came up with your recommendations. And of course, you used your judgment, but you looked at all of that. What I wanted to clarify is that you have your mandate, and you've been fulfilling it by looking at the problems we have and then proposing solutions and potential options, but you haven't necessarily you didn't necessarily look at which things were under whose jurisdiction. Well, you're a committee, and I'm not making a criticism. I'm just making an observation. In some cases, the federal government can't necessarily implement what you've recommended. I just wanted to point that out, but that doesn't mean that they're not interesting or relevant recommendations. Now, on page 18, you talk about the need to collaborate with provinces and territories, especially when it comes to keeping truckers in their jobs. Among the measures that we're proposing in the Bloc Québécois, because when we got the truckers at the committee, there was this question of an aging population. The truckers are aging. That's a major issue for them. And among our proposals that we think could be good would be tax credits or other measures that would encourage older workers to stay on the job market. We want it to be attractive for them to stay in that job rather than leaving the job market. What do you think of this type of recommendation or this type of program if it were to exist?
With one of the recommendations that was in the report. We identified retired workers as bringing retired workers back to work, even on a part-time basis, as an opportunity. And I do believe we identified financial incentives or eliminating barriers or disincentives for older workers to remain in the workforce, to work in complete alignment.
Vous êtes sur mute, Monsieur Gattuso.
You're muted, Mr. Gattuso. Now, in our report, if truckers want to continue to work, we do need to give them tax-related incentives if we want to keep them in the market, because we have a labor shortage. So I think that's a great idea. Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Barcelo-Duval.
Crack, the floor is yours. You have 6 minutes.
Mr. Chair, I'd like to, I appreciate the presentations, and also wanted to thank Ms. Yako for her briefing that she gave me on the report that the task force put together. Unfortunately, we had some very poor Northern BC cell service at the time, so it was a little bit fragmented on my end, but I did appreciate the overview. And I wanted to ask a few questions based on the report. There were a few areas that I found particularly interesting. One is around labor dispute delays. And I note in the list of stakeholders consulted that there are a number of labor organizations that were part of the conversation. The report states, the Minister of Labor should urgently convene a council of experts to develop a new collaborative labor relations paradigm that would reduce the likelihood of strikes, threat of strikes, or lockouts that risk the operation or fluidity of the national transportation supply chain. You know, I think we would all want that, and I think if it was possible, we should have done it a lot of years ago. What's envisioned here? Like, this description it's fairly vague. I'm wondering what sort of ideas you heard, especially from the labor folks that you consulted as part of this work.
Well, one of the things that we heard, and by the way, nice to see you again, Mr. Backrack. one of the things that we heard very consistently from many of the stakeholders was a need for certainty. And certainty, in some cases, actually trumped trumped efficiency. So, and certainty they equated with reliability. And reliability now is almost more important than competitiveness or cost. And one of the main reasons for lack of reliability that was identified was related to the fact that there are, significant significant disruptions that can take place as a consequence of lockouts or the risk of strikes. And so what we had tried to do with that recommendation was to essentially say, if as a country we want to continue to be known as a reliable trading partner, we have to do everything that we can to try and control man-made disruptions or the controllable disruptions. And one of those is obviously through elimination of labor disruptions. So we didn't have a particular solution in mind because none of us are experts in labor relations. What we did want to bring to the forefront was the fact that this is an issue that needs to be addressed urgently, and the experts on this are the Minister of Labor, our union leaders, our employers, and they're the ones who are going to have to figure out how to do that because of how important having a reliable supply chain is to the future of our country.
And if I add up to that is like, just give you an example. A boat can take 10 days to cross the ocean to come to Canada. Legislation will permit 72 hours to announce there's either a strike or a lockout. How can we be considered a reliable supplier when a boat is coming through the ocean and he's like 4 days near Canada, and and it's being announced there's going to be, a couple of hours later there'll be a strike. So that's also some of the things that our principle was to be a reliable and fluid partners. So how can we need to redefine ourselves to be recognized at that.
I would offer that I think the way that we build that reputation as a reliable and efficient and certain partner is by having good labor relations, which I think a lot of that responsibility does rest with the government and with the companies in the supply chain. But perhaps I'll move on to First Nations consultation. I noted that the task force found that First Nations consultation was outside the scope of its work, given the short timeline. And yet, in the report, there are recommendations that pertain very directly to First Nations. I would also offer that because labor shortages is one of the big concerns expressed in this report, Indigenous communities in the region I represent have some of the highest unemployment rates of any communities. It seems like a tremendous opportunity to create employment opportunities in Indigenous communities and Indigenous nations, and yet that's not reflected in the recommendations. Could you just talk about the decision that was made not to consult even Indigenous leadership organizations in Canada as part of the scope of this project?
Well, we did consult with the AFN, and if you look at our mandate, sorry, I'm getting a bit of feedback. Okay. And if you look at our mandate, the mandate asked us to speak with industry stakeholders specifically, but we did extend consultations to the AFN. The AFN were very clear that our discussions with them could not be considered consultations. And that's why in one of our recommendations, we do talk about the need for engagement with Aboriginal peoples within various Indigenous groups, and that should take place as part of the development of the National Labour Force Strategy, as well as the National Transportation Supply Chain Strategy. So we knew that within 100 days we were unable to do sufficient consultation and engagement. We recognized as well that Aboriginals groups and northern communities, northern and remote communities, were very important parts of the transportation supply chain, and we needed as a country to be able to
Thank you very much, Ms. Yako. Unfortunately, Mr. Bachrach's time is up. Next, we will go to Mr. Strahl. Mr. Strahl, the floor is yours. You have 5 minutes.
Thank you very much. I wanted to just make sure I captured something you just said, Ms. Yako. You said reliability is more important than competitiveness, and what was the other thing you said there?
Yeah, I said reliability was almost trumping efficiency and competitiveness.
Okay.
But they're all important.
Sure. And we've heard that certainly in our study from the airline sector in particular about the instability and reliability being having a outsized impact on their operation. So it certainly is follows with what we've heard. I guess I should start as well by congratulating you on the comprehensive nature of your report. I've certainly noted that Transport Canada has no shortage of excellent reports. And the question becomes, does the government action flow from that? So I hope that we will hear from you as time goes on. I know you don't have a mandate to particularly follow it through, but I hope that we will hear from you on what you're seeing from both the private sector and from government. I wanted to talk a bit about regarding rail. I wanted to focus in on rail. The CTA holds railroads accountable for providing adequate service, and I've certainly talked to shippers that and heard that the standard is difficult to enforce because it's so poorly defined. Did you have any recommendations? Did you find that was a problem in trying to determine how? I know you talked very extensively about the relationship between shippers and the railways, but how do you think we can better define what providing adequate service is so that there can be that reliability and predictability and stability that is needed to have a smooth supply chain?
I'll cover that, Louise. Mr. Strahl, the one thing that we are in our recommendation, we're putting more power to CTA, and we also list some criteria that need to be followed by CTA in order to engage the railways. So for sure, with that in their hand, and we're beefing up their authority. So that should be quite helpful to help the supply chain fluidity.
Of the CTA, I note that was a key recommendation, to give them more power to be an arbiter of disputes, to kind of cut the minister out of that and make sure that there was that accountability. What did you hear from both the railways and shippers, customers of the railway, in terms? I've certainly heard there's concerns that there are repercussions when remedies are sought from the CTA or from Transport Canada when service standards are not met, that there could be implications down the line in terms of contracting and that sort of thing. Did you hear that sort of feedback from customers of the railway, that they were actually concerned if they used the dispute resolution mechanisms at their disposal, that they would actually be penalized in future contracts?
Yes, we heard that.
Did you have a recommendation on how to prevent that from being an ongoing concern?
Well, as Jean said, one of the things that we recommended was that the CTA be given greater authority, longer timelines for investigation, and we identified very specific data that we thought might be helpful. But at the same time, we recognize that there's a potential for unintended consequences. So it is something that I think needs to be followed as as that recommendation is implemented, assuming it is implemented, that it be reviewed again to ensure that there's sufficient authority and sufficient data requirements. And I see that Jean wants to say something here.
And if we add up, since rail is also a North American activity, we also, for our discussion, we spent a week in Washington, and we did look at some of the practice of the Surface Transportation Board. So it's also in our report.
Thank you. Is that how much time?
That is exactly 5 minutes and 2 seconds,
perfect.
Mr. Strahl.
Perfect.
Thank you very much. Prochainement, nous avons Monsieur Yak.
Next, Mr. Yakino, over to you. You have 5 minutes. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and I'd like to thank the witnesses for being here today. Mr. Gattuso, as a way to facilitate things for new drivers, what do you think about setting criteria for delivering certification or licenses that are less onerous for commercial truck drivers who are only covering short distances? Well, listen. If we look at our report and the expertise that was mentioned and this recommendation, well, this would be the way to get more people. The idea is to get more drivers so that we can offer more services. So I would encourage it, but I'd like to have the opinion of industry stakeholders. I'd like to know how they would be with that, if they'd be okay with that. Thank you. You said earlier that we need more immigrants. How can we solve this labor shortage problem knowing that Quebec pulls the rug out from under our feet because it limits the number of immigrants it accepts? Well, I can't speak on behalf of Quebec. I'm not the Premier of Quebec. No, but I'm asking you the question because you know Quebec very well. You're from Quebec. You speak French very well. And so you are very familiar with the situation that Canada is in with Quebec and the other provinces, and that's why I'm asking you that question so you could help guide us. Well, listen, like you, my parents came from Italy. They came in through Ellis Island in New York. Listen, I can't speak specifically to that. I think we need immigrants. The government has its policies. I'm not in the government. I think we need more immigrants. This way we can help the country grow and will remain an important player in the world, because we said that in our presentation. 61% of our GDP is in trade. And if we don't have the workers, we won't be recognized as a good supplier for our national and international clients. Well, as you know, training and skills, most of that falls within the province's jurisdiction, even though the federal government has played a much more proactive role in that recently. To what extent is it important for the different levels of government and the different provinces work together to solve the labor shortage problem in the transportation sector? Have you observed that the governments aren't working together or as best they could? And if so, can you tell us a little more about that? If the governments would work well together, I don't think we'd have a labor shortage, but I think the governments have to admit that it's a national problem. We're lacking workers. It's not just a provincial problem, it's a national problem. We need to work together to find the necessary means to make sure that the country continues to grow. And we have to ensure the efficiency of our supply chain. Mr. Gattuso, in your opinion, starting when has this labor shortage problem existed? Well, I'd say in 2015 we started to feel it. Now, we looked at the curves, the demographic curves and the aging population. It could have been predicted that this was coming because immigration was not sufficiently significant enough to deal with this situation. But of course, the growth of the country, there are all kinds of hypotheses. You know, in years past, we could have seen this, but look at the economic growth of the country. And these are the kinds of things we look at to find this out. Well, listen, I know that you're very knowledgeable. I'm not asking you to engage in politics, but as being somebody from the outside, well, you've identified the problem very well, right? So what are you recommending to us? Because indeed, our objective is to listen to witnesses like you and in conclusion, come up with a report. So what can you tell us? You've already mentioned a few things. Is there anything else that you could guide us with, something that hasn't been said yet? A rabbit in the hat, something like that.
Think about solution. I think that, you know, and we did look at labor was a major issue. We spoke with different stakeholders. We need to train. It's not only to get immigrants in the short term, because it's not, we can talk about automation, but right now with the short term, we need immigrants, we need temporary workers, and we need to train them and to find them places to stay. That's what we should focus on.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur Iacono. Merci, Monsieur.
Thank you very much, Mr. Iacono and Mr. Gattuso. Mr. Barcelo Duval, you have 2.5 minutes. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. This conversation that we just heard was very interesting, so I'm going to make a few comments on that, even though I know I only have a couple minutes and a half. First of all, I'd like to say that, well, my spouse is an immigrant. One of my children is a visible minority. And so I completely understand this question of immigration. However, I think that Quebec needs to be in charge of its own policies so that we continue speaking French, for example. That's a very important thing in Quebec. It's part of our culture. And so from that perspective, I continue to defend our public policies in Quebec. Now, there's something that the federal government could work on, and this is the processing of immigration files. I don't know if people talk to you about this, but the slowness with which these applications are dealt with is a problem, and temporary workers as well. And sometimes what happens is someone is hired, they follow the whole process, and then, you know, people get discouraged and they lose workers because of the system. Do you think that the federal government should be more efficient when it comes to immigration processes, especially when it comes to temporary foreign workers? For example, when it's time to work in the fields, those who work in agriculture told us it's a very slow process. So yes, there's definitely room for improving efficiency in that area. Now, perhaps to continue in the same vein, in the 80s, a lot of people said, well, immigrants are going to steal our jobs. And today, now we're saying the opposite. We're saying we really need immigrants to fill these jobs. However, the question that's being asked, well, in the 80s, people said immigrants aren't stealing anybody's jobs because they create their own jobs. And today, they're going to create their own jobs or at least create additional demand. So how are we going to deal with that problem? That is to say, we'll need even more people. What we need skilled workers, that's one thing. We also need unskilled workers, and we'll train them because there's some sectors like agri-food. Let's say you work at Olimel, and you're doing slaughtering, well, your skill is not as high as others. So that's something to be considered. So we need skilled and unskilled. As I said earlier, 100 years ago, when my grandfather and father came from Italy, they were given a ticket and they were being hired to shovel snow. Thank you very much, Mr. Gattuso. Unfortunately, there's no time left. Next.
Mr. Backrack, the floor is yours. You have 2.5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. One of the issues that we saw during the pandemic in Northwest BC, we saw a number of sawmills curtail their production because they couldn't find rail cars to ship their product. And I noticed in the report it talks about, you know, private sector entities working in a competitive environment doesn't always create outcomes that are in the national best interest. In light of the recommendations around the CTA playing a more proactive role, Would that be a possible solution to instances where you have companies that are struggling to get transportation for their product and get it to market?
So one of the things that we heard was that there's lack of data visibility. So projections in terms of demand for transportation services is not as well known as it could be and as it should be, and that's something that we've not talked to the committee about. So I'm not sure that I'm answering your question directly, Mr. Bachrach, but if we had better data visibility so that we had improved transportation services projections, demand projections, then that would give CTA ammunition, information that they could use to help ensure that there were sufficient services, sufficient cars for Northwest BC companies.
I guess reading through the report, the sense that I take away is that the task force envisions a more proactive interventionist role for the government and agencies like the CTA to ensure that the supply chain as a whole is more efficient and delivers on the national interest. Is that a fair characterization?
What we envision is actually greater collaboration between government, private, and the private sector, between levels of government, between and amongst the private sector. So it's that collaboration that would allow for greater reliability and efficiency of the supply chain, not government intervention necessarily. Government has an important role to play, obviously, but government is not going to solve this problem.
Thank you very much, Ms. Yako, and thank you, Mr. Bachrach. Next, we have Mr. Genereux. Mr. Genereux, the floor is yours. You have 5 minutes.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. So under Principle 2 in the report, you state that Canada's transportation supply chain is made up of a network of companies that are publicly traded, privately held, and independently operated. You state that they often work in silos rather than a cohesive system, and you also state that transportation supply chain must begin to operate as a seamless single entity. So what recommendations can you point to that ensure seamless operations?
One thing that, before you go to seamless operation, that it was key and to solve when we were talking about the industry, the supply chain is working in silo, is digitalization. Digitalization is key in order to share information. So even though there's a publicly traded company like that, we have to find ways so they can share information, so in order that everyone is performing better, that the total supply chain is performing better, rather than the need of each silos. That is the thinking also in the report, and that's why collaboration is key.
Anything to add, Ms. Yako? Okay, I guess in that same principle, the report states that without these, intervention may be required to ensure that the transportation supply chain operates smoothly. So this on top of the supply chain office, I guess, can you confirm that you're not suggesting the nationalization of Canada's supply chain?
We're not suggesting nationalization. What we said was there should be voluntary cooperation and collaboration between the various parties, private sector entities, and government. And in the event that private sector entities do not want to share information that is necessary to understand how the supply chain is operating, then that's when government may need to require that certain pieces of information be shared.
Okay, I didn't come up in the transcript, but I note, so for those that are following along the transcripts, that you both shook your head vehemently no to the nationalization of the supply chain. Well, I guess I want to get to, you talk about, empowering the CTA and then in beefing up its mandate and resources, but then also talking about the supply chain office. And again, I have to highlight that the supply chain office has been, at least in my meetings, has been the point of contention from a number of stakeholders. Some say they like it, but there's also quite a few that say that they're nervous about it. And you just have to look at other government agencies. CMHC comes to mind. It's kind of hit or miss if it's been successful or not, depending, I guess, on what side of the table you're on at any given moment. But if that's the case, I'm just try to square with me. If you're beefing this up and then you're also creating this, how does that help to make things more streamlined and seamless?
If you look at go back to the supply chain office, okay? Supply chain office, when it will pay itself just to get back our trade share worldwide, especially also with U.S. So I think that you can look at the gaining back 3 share point of our U.S. trade is tremendous amount of money, and it won't cost billions of dollars. So, but right now, as not only the supply chain office is working in silo, but within government, the different departments, what we saw, are sometimes not talking to each other. And each of them have KPI, are involved in the supply chain. So having someone...
Can I just interrupt just for a second, Ms. Gattuso? Just because I worry that with that logic, do then all departments say, okay, fair, supply chain office has got it? Is that what your perception is going to happen? Because my experience with the government, that's not what necessarily happens. Everybody fights for their piece of real estate.
Everybody will continue to fight for their piece of real estate. The objective is that to put KPIs in each department that are oriented to supply chain and reporting to those KPI, the supply chain office would be following them. So making sure that each department also keeping track there, because at the end of the day, it's Canada trade performance that's going to be key. If we want to give more program as it facilitate the lives of Canadians, we cannot permit to lose share of our trade business. As simple as that. We are a country of 38 million of population. We need to grow, and we're capable. If Netherlands with 15 million of population are capable to be a world trade important player, we can do the same with Canada. But we need someone that is following track and making sure that each department is keeping track of their KPI on the supply chain.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur Gattuso. Thank you very much, Mr. Genereux. Finally, for our first panel, we have Mr. Badaway.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
The floor is yours.
Mr. Chairman, by 2016, this is a quote from the Emerson report back from 2015. By 2016, an expected 350% increase in world trade will tilt in favor of the emerging economies, and their exports will become more specialized, entailing higher value-added activities. It will be important to anticipate the demands on our transportation sector and develop policies and infrastructure to support those needs. So with that as part of the Emerson report, and taking into consideration the many reports that were identified earlier on that we've completed, a question to the Supply Chain Committee members. Do you feel we should be moving forward with a multimodal transportation labor strategy, including all methods of transportation, with a goal to strengthen our international trade performance that takes into consideration the recommendations contained within the following studies? The Canadian Transportation Act, CTA review, Emerson report, the interim reports on establishing a Canadian transportation and logistics strategy, which this committee completed in the past, the Ports Modernization Review, the St. Lawrence Seaway Review, the Blue Economy Strategy, the Supply Chain Study, most recently completed by this committee, and the most recent final report of the National Supply Chain Task Force, 2022. To get a bit more granular, and to give you an example, in Niagara, we're embarking on a capital project, a Great Lakes Innovation and Training Facility. And the focus of this facility is going to be a campus that will be preparing and training the next generation of transportation specialists, integrating distribution and logistics, working hand in hand with up-to-date movement of goods along strategic trade corridors, such as that on the Great Lakes, integrating with road, rail, air, aligned with up-to-date data analysis leading to integrated management. So therefore, is it fair to state that yesterday's drivers, engineers, captains, pilots, while moving goods are tomorrow's transportation specialists, operators, data, and logistics managers, trained to offer additional corporate and customer value through fluidity and recognized as a skilled trade. So I pose that question to the two individuals, specifically because it's 2022. And with that said, and all of what I just mentioned, we're looking at the movement of goods and those that are moving our goods as being more than just drivers. They're in fact transportation specialists and should be trained in that manner and recognized through a skilled trade. Would you agree? Jean,
Yes.
we'll start or Louise, go ahead.
Yes, all of those reports that you mentioned had very salient recommendations. Many of them are still should be considered because they're still in play.
And I'll add up to that. In the report, when we put that we need also to have a supply chain labor strategy, that's exactly what we were thinking. Is actually not only truck driver, but everybody that are touched by logistic, because we need to even push furthermore to recognize the logistic jobs in this country, because it's part of the equation to become a better world trade.
Do you feel that the supply chain, the next steps in your recommendation with respect to a supply chain office or an organization, do you feel, and can you give us some advice with respect to how that can actually fit into what I had just mentioned with respect to facilitating not only the movement of trade, but the folks that will be actually moving that trade, not just domestically, but internationally?
All of the key individual you'll be choosing should also be very focused business people, and so you're going to need leaders that will also be capable to manage with each department, okay, and to manage and pushing those trade objectives, because it's so depending on the future of Canada. At the end of the day, when you see the importance as trade as in our GDP, it's nice that we have plants and growers that are producing widgets, okay, or grain or oil. But the key thing is to service customer and to be competitive worldwide. So if we are not competitive, that's why we're going to need strong leader on the supply chain office to get this thing moving. And probably that making sure that supply chain office, sometimes they also have a group of business leaders that are looking at the performance of that the supply chain office.
Thank you very much, colleagues. This concludes the questioning for the first panel. On behalf of members of this committee, I would like to thank our witnesses, Ms. Louise Yako, as well as Monsieur Jean Gattuso, for your time and your testimony today. We will now suspend for 5 minutes as we prepare for the second panel. This meeting is suspended. I call this meeting back to order. We will begin this second round with the opening remarks, and we will start with the Department of Citizenship and Immigration. The floor is now yours. You have 5 minutes.
Thanks so much, Mr. Chair and committee members. My name is Ian Gillespie, and I'm Director of Temporary Worker Policy at IRCC. I would like to begin by acknowledging that I am joining you from the traditional unceded territory of the Algonquin and Anishinaabe people. As you know, Canada is facing labor shortages across the country and across sectors, including transportation. Immigration complements efforts to build domestic labor capacity and is an increasingly important contributor to Canada's prosperity and economic growth. Both temporary and permanent residents bring skills our economy needs and help fill gaps in our labor force. Les programmes d'immigration économique soutiennent une économie.
Economic immigration programs support a strong Canadian economy by attracting talent from around the world. Typically, economic immigrants are educated, able to integrate into the Canadian labour market with ease, and contribute to workplace diversity. A range of programs ensure that all regions across Canada can realize the benefits of economic immigration. Selecting new permanent residents is a shared responsibility between the federal and provincial territorial governments. Through the provincial nominee program in particular, jurisdictions are able to prioritize the attraction and retention of newcomers with the skills most needed in each region.
Immigration measures are helping to meet Canada's labour market needs. Last year, IRCC introduced a time-limited temporary resident to permanent resident pathway to help retain the talent of over 90,000 essential workers and international graduates already living and working in Canada. They included workers in a range of transportation occupations, such as courier drivers, longshore workers, and ramp attendants. Changes to the National Occupational Classification that are coming into effect on November 16th will also enable foreign nationals working as truck drivers to now qualify for permanent residence through the skilled economic programs managed through IRCC's Express Entry system. Canada welcomed over 405,000 permanent residents in 2021, a record number. The target for 2022 was just under 432,000, and as announced the other day, will rise to 465,000 in 2023. In this way, permanent immigration helps address demographic and economic challenges over the long term. Over the shorter term, Canada's temporary worker and international student programs play a significant role. They are demand-driven with no caps or limits, so they can be flexible and responsive to the changing labor market landscape. They address the immediate workforce needs of diverse employers, provide a wide range of skill levels and educational attainment, and facilitate business productivity, growth, and innovation. For example, a new measure starting November 15th will allow the more than 500,000 international students already in Canada to work more hours off campus, which will help to address labor shortages and allow them to earn more income to support their studies. IRCC also recently announced that international graduates with expiring post-graduation work permits will have the opportunity to work in Canada for an additional 18 months. L'année dernière, plus de 5,000 travailleurs étrangers.
Last year, over 5,000 temporary foreign workers received work permits to fill specific job vacancies in transportation. Almost 2/3 came through the Temporary Foreign Worker Program, which is led by Employment and Social Development Canada.
Jobs can also be filled through the International Mobility Program, which exempts employers from the requirements of the Temporary Foreign Worker Program when hiring foreign nationals whose work will create broader economic benefits for Canadians. This program facilitates access, for example, to foreign airline personnel and to railway maintenance workers. It also enables faster hiring of international technicians and professionals from countries with which Canada has trade agreements, including for occupations such as engineers, pilots, and highly skilled mariners. IRCC processes work permits for foreign workers applying through both temporary worker programs. Since the beginning of the pandemic and to support the recovery of global supply chains, IRCC has been prioritizing work permit applications for foreign truck drivers to fill critical needs in Canada's trucking industry. While the initiatives I've mentioned will help over the longer term, employers face immediate needs for skilled foreign labor, which can only be solved by their timely entry. As you're likely aware, demand for work permits has been rising, and this has contributed to a growing backlog and lengthening processing times. IRCC is introducing a number of measures to address this issue, including hiring additional processing staff and exploring technology-based solutions, which are expected to move IRCC closer to meeting its service standards by spring 2023. Dans le fond, l'immigration n'est qu'une partie de la solution.
At the end of the day, immigration is only part of the solution and a complement to domestic measures that my colleagues have mentioned to alleviate labor shortages in the transportation sector and elsewhere in Canada's economy. Thank you for the opportunity to speak with you.
Much, Mr. Gillespie. And next, we have the Department of Employment and Social Development. The floor is yours. You have 5 minutes for your opening remarks.
Great. Merci, Président et membres du comité. Je suis
Thank you, Chair and committee members.
de la Direction Générale.
I am Andrew Brown, Senior Assistant Deputy Minister at Skills and Employment Branch. I'm joining you today from the unceded traditional territory of the Algonquin Anishinaabe people. I am pleased to be here to discuss labor shortages.
Are affecting practically all sectors of the economy in most regions of the country. As of July 2022, there were nearly 1 million job vacancies across Canada, which are twice as many occupations showing strong labor shortages now compared to back in 2019. For example, the trucking industry is a significant contributor to the national economy with a GDP of $20 billion in 2021, or about 1/3 of the entire transportation sector. The industry employs roughly 278,000 employees and has a vacancy rate of 9.4%, which is significantly higher than that of the entire labor market, roughly 5.9%. For truck drivers, this means roughly 28,000 unfilled positions. And this figure is in line with what we're hearing from the Canadian Trucking Alliance, who forecast that the trucking industry will have a shortage of 55,000 workers at the end of 2023. Demographic shifts that are rooted in an aging population and retirements are adding additional pressures by limiting available workers. As of August, occupations related to the transportation had some of the highest average age of workers in the economy. As the government looks to address labor shortages in Canada, we recognize that there's 4 potential avenues for increasing labor supply. One is supporting the transition of new entrants to the labor market, principally youth. Second is welcoming talent from around the world, more specifically immigrants and temporary foreign workers. Third is increasing the participation of groups that are underrepresented in the labor market. And fourth, helping individuals already working who need some upskilling or reskilling to adapt and stay in the labor force longer. So to address labor shortages in the Canadian economy, it's going to be necessary to maximize all sources of labor in the short and longer term. Youth are Canada's largest source of new entrants to the labor market, with about 4.9 million young job seekers expected to enter the labor force between 2019 and 2028. And to help youth and students build job skills, connect with employers, Budget 2021 offered over $720 million in additional funding for the Youth Employment and Skills Strategy, the Student Work Placement Program, and the Canada Summer Jobs Program. As you would have heard from my colleague, immigration is a source of new labor supply, and as a complement to permanent immigration, approximately 100,000 temporary foreign workers enter Canada every year. Recent changes allow employers to hire up to 30% of their workforce through the Temporary Foreign Worker Program for low-wage positions for 1 year in sectors that are experiencing significant shortages. Other employers are allowed to hire up to 20% of their workforce for low-wage positions until further notice, an increase from the former 10% cap for many employers. Another source of labor supply is underrepresented groups. Increasing the participation rate of women, Indigenous people, persons with disabilities, and Black and racialized Canadians in the workplace would significantly help to boost labor supply.
Equally important to our labor market initiatives, the government's recent and ambitious investments in childcare, affordable housing, transportation, and broadband are creating the systems and supports necessary to help increase the participation of Canadians in the labor market. Reducing the skills mismatch and making better use of available talent will be key to addressing employment needs and shortages. To this end, the Government of Canada has taken concrete steps to help reduce shortages throughout the economy. An interesting example of recent Budget 2021 investments is the Sector Workforce Solutions Program. The program, which provides $960 million over 3 years, assists key sectors by funding industry-focused activities that will provide workers with training and skills upgrades, and helps employers attract and retain a skilled workforce. In Budget 2021, the Government of Canada also made significant investments.
To cut you off, if you could just wrap it up.
Okay. Également des investissements importants.
Also made significant investments to establish a new apprenticeship service, prioritized funding for basic skills programs through the Skills for Success program. Perhaps I'll just say that we will continue collaborating with our federal partners and our counterparts and our partners in the provinces and territories in order to address the current and future labor market pressures. Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Brown. Next, we have the Department of Transportation.
Merci beaucoup et bonsoir. Good evening, Mr. Chair and committee members. I would like to begin by acknowledging that I'm joining you today from the traditional unceded territory of the Algonquin and Anishinaabe people. I'm Melanie Vanstone, Director General of Multimodal and Road Safety Programs at Transport Canada. Thank you for having me here today to share Transport Canada's perspectives on the acute labor and skill shortages facing the transportation sector, including occupations such as truckers, mariners, pilots, and rail workers. A robust, diverse, and future-skilled transportation workforce is an enabler of Canada's economic recovery and an efficient supply chain, while also supporting the safety and security of our transportation system. The transportation labor force supports the movement of goods and people for transportation-reliant sectors, including manufacturing, natural resources, and agriculture across the country. As other witnesses have expressed to this committee, there are a number of structural pressures that are contributing to labor and skill shortages in transportation. These include the high cost of education and training for some professions. It can cost up to $90,000 to become a commercial pilot and more than $15,000 to become a truck driver, coupled with low initial pay. There is some lack of awareness of jobs and careers in the industry, as well, changing demographics and a lack of diversity in the industry are barriers. For example, transportation ranks below other regulated sectors in terms of diversity. And finally, in some cases, there's a poor image of the work culture across the industry due to work-life balance challenges, inadequate infrastructure, and concerns about the sector's working culture. Automation and other technologies will continue to change the industry going forward, meaning the nature of jobs in the industry will continue to evolve, emphasizing the need for increasingly advanced skills. Recognizing the importance of labor to the functioning of the system, Transport Canada has developed a strategy to contribute to addressing labor and skill shortages. The strategy has 4 pillars with an emphasis on the recruitment and retention of underrepresented groups. So these pillars are: first, developing targeted research, data, and analysis; second, promoting awareness and outreach; third, addressing the high cost of training and other barriers by leveraging programs across government; and finally, modernizing approaches to regulations so that these do not create unnecessary barriers. The department continues to work closely with other federal departments and agencies, including those represented with me today, industry representatives, and other levels of government. Transport Canada has also been taking some direct actions in many areas. For example, the Marine Training Program was recently renewed in Budget 2022 as part of the government's Ocean Protection Plan to reduce barriers to marine training for underrepresented groups in the marine labor force, such as women, Northerners, Inuit, and Indigenous peoples. the department has negotiated a number of reciprocal agreements to recognize certain foreign issued certificates for seafarers in Canada. Currently, we have 5 agreements in place with an additional 3 on ongoing negotiation. TC is leveraging technology to modernize our certification processes and digitizing our aviation pilot licensing system to better support the need for the industry to recruit and retain talent. TC has engaged the Conference Board of Canada to produce a 2-phase report to examine the economic impacts of transportation labor shortages on the Canadian economy. And we've engaged Employment and Social Development Canada in several key programming areas. In particular, the Sectoral Workforce Solutions Program will invest $960 million over 3 years to advance skills and training in 7 different key economic sectors, including transportation. And finally, I'd note, in collaboration with ESDC's Job Bank, Transport Canada launched the Transportation Job and Career Pathway website to help promote careers in the sector. Transport Canada and other departments are reviewing the specific recommendations in the National Supply Chain Task Force's final report. This includes those relating to labor and skill shortages. The task force's report will help inform the national supply chain strategy currently under development. We recognize that continued collaboration is required with our federal partners, provinces and territories, and industry to address labor and skill shortages in the transportation sector, including looking at the relevant recommendations from the task force. Merci beaucoup pour votre temps aujourd'hui. Thank you very much for your time today. I'd be happy to address any questions you may have relating to Transport Canada's role with labor and skill shortages in the sector.
Thank you very much, Ms. Vanstone, for your opening remarks. We will begin our round of questioning with Dr. Lewis. Dr. Lewis, the floor is yours. You have 6 minutes.
Thank you so much. My first question will be for Mr. Gillespie. It's well known that there are backlogs in the processing of permanent residents, citizens, and visa applications, and yet we know that immigration has an important role to play in solving these labor shortages problem in Canada. What is the state of the backlog of applications with respect to foreign visas and with regard to processing temporary foreign workers?
Thanks, Mr. Chair. I'm happy to intervene on behalf of IRCC, and thank you for the question. Providing a bit of context here in terms of all the measures that we are taking, and you're right that there is quite an inventory and a backlog that we need to work through. And what we, in addition to what Mr. Gillespie mentioned in the opening remarks, it's important to note that the progress that is being made since we've doubled down on efforts to work through that inventory and work through those backlogs. So a few statistics to share with the committee. So since we finalized about 560,000 study permit applications in 2021, which was much higher than the figures in 2019, so pre-pandemic. And so far in 2022, we've
Mr. Jeanette, I'm sorry, I heard that there are 2.6 million applications in backlog. Is that correct? Can you confirm that?
So I'll have to get back in terms of confirming the actual stats. I have a bit of a breakdown in terms of I can talk to you about the work permit applications, for example. We currently have an inventory of 316. I believe the figure for the temporary resident visas is around 800,000. But again, I don't have those statistics at my fingertips, but we would gladly provide those to the committee to support the study.
Okay, and what's the actual processing time for foreign worker applications in, say, for example, the transport section?
So again, I have statistics in terms of processing times as of September for work permits, not specific to the transportation sector, but work permits generally. And as of September 2022, they stand at approximately 116 days. But as Mr. Gillespie mentioned, with the measures we're putting in place in terms of hiring additional staff, using the technology to find new ways and efficient ways to process, we're looking to return to service standards in the spring of 2023.
And have you placed a priority on the transportation sector given the gravity of the situation?
So again, as I think my colleague Mr. Gillespie mentioned, there is a priority on truck drivers, for example. But as you're no doubt aware, and as this committee is aware, there is a high demand as the program and the pathway to apply for work permits is uncapped. It's unlimited. We've seen a resurgence in the volume of applications across all lines of business. So we are quickly working to get back to service standards. And since from January to September of this year, we've issued approximately 552,000 work permits, which when we compare that to last year, that figure was about 147,000 for that same period.
Do you have any numbers on how many employers actually start an LMIA process and then stop?
I believe I would have to defer to my colleagues from ESDC for that question.
Thanks very much for the question. I don't have the specific numbers on that front, but what I can say from an LMIA processing perspective is that last year we processed almost 70,000 labor market impact assessments for the temporary foreign worker program. Year to date, we were at about 45,000. So we are certainly seeing 45 to 50,000. So we are certainly seeing a year-over-year increase. But on the positive side, on that front, in terms of processing times overall, we are processing those across all the different streams at 31 business days.
Per year. In the year that you processed 70,000, how many applications did you have?
It was that we processed all of the applications that came in. So it was 68,000 applications received for a little over 100,000 positions.
So only 68,000 were received and you processed them all, none were withdrawn or rejected?
There is a portion of the of those that are rejected or are not finalized because of a number of different factors, be it the fact that the employer doesn't meet all the obligations of the program, and we can certainly come back with additional details in terms of that breakdown.
Thank you. My next question is for Ms. Vanstone. We heard Monday that Transport Canada is actually turning away or failing to certify some foreign-trained, skilled personnel from certain fields, especially in the aviation field. Are you aware of AMEs that have skills in other countries, work on perhaps even Canadian planes, and are turned away 99% at a 99% rate? Are you aware of that?
15%, 15-second response, please.
Thank you. So I have some, I do not work in the aviation area of Transport Canada. In terms of AE licenses, this number is not a correct number. This statistic only represents a small portion of AME applicants who have unapproved foreign basic training. Depending on where the applicant resides, it dictates where they can apply. So they may apply to different regions of Transport Canada.
Thank you very much, Ms. Vanstone. Unfortunately, we have no more time for that question. Next, we have Mr. Iacono. Mr. Iacono, la parole est à vous. Vous avez 6 minutes.
Over to you, Mr. Iacono. You have 6 minutes. Thank you very much. And I thank the witnesses for being here tonight and for guiding us as to how we can solve this problem around labor shortages. Ms. Vanstone, the transportation sector is definitely feeling the labor shortage, especially in rail and road transportation. As the Conference Board of Canada noted, in the transportation sector, we will need to call on older workers so that we can meet the needs. Please tell us, what are the major challenges in encouraging young people to go into transportation? And in your opinion, what are the possible solutions? Thank you.
question, and I apologize for the darkness, trying to get someone to reactivate the lights in our building. So I agree, and thank you, Mr. Chair, I appreciate the question. We have been looking at Transport Canada, working with of course, with our colleagues at the federal level to look at ways to try to draw the attention of the transportation sector to young Canadians. We think that there is, I think it is fair to say that there is a lack of awareness of careers in the transportation sector, or perhaps a misunderstanding of the skills and the range of transportation careers that are available. We at Transport Canada have, I mentioned in my opening remarks, created a website dedicated to helping people explore various careers in the transportation industry, to help them identify where they would go for training for those careers. I think over time it's something where we also maybe opportunities to work with our colleagues from the industry to look at strategies to, in particular, try to appeal to young people to start off their careers in the transportation sector. I'm not sure if my colleagues from Employment and Social Development Canada would like to speak in more detail to some of the youth programs that are run from that department.
Please, yes, go ahead. Anybody else?
Sure. So Andrew Brown with Employment and Social Development Canada, and I think to add, I mean, we've got a number of different sorts of training programs and supports, and we really work with, first off, it starts with working with provinces and territories through supports that we provide them in terms of very broadly supports to train and upskill workers. And it's really for provinces and territories then to determine what some of the priority areas are for investments within their own jurisdictions. And then secondly, we take a look at what sorts of programming that the federal government can bring as well to support various sectors. And so that's where I know my colleague from Transport already mentioned, but this new sectorial program that was introduced last year is one of the examples where we're able to bring a focus as well to the transport sector and work to identify projects to support skills and employment programming that is targeted to workers and employers in the transportation sector.
Merci. Pour les prochaines questions,
Thank you. For the next questions, well, I will refer to the report that was published by the labor task force. Now, there is the foreign temporary worker program, and there's a need to accelerate applications for people who would be eligible to work for businesses in the transportation sector. To what extent is it possible to take this route given the current backlog in the processing of immigration applications? What needs to be done to meet these objectives? Ms. Van Stone.
So Transport Canada is taking a number of actions related to addressing labor shortages in the transportation sector. As I said, we're working very closely with our federal colleagues. We have been doing work to address regulatory barriers under our own department to ensure that these are not posing unnecessary barriers to entry into transportation careers while ensuring that safety and security are preserved. And we, of course, continue to engage closely to leverage, ensure that all federal programs in support of labor shortages can be leveraged.
Merci. La prochaine question, c'est pour Monsieur Andrew.
Thank you. The next question is for Andrew. And I'm referring again to the report by the National Supply Chain Task Force. One of the recommendations is to support businesses and community organizations and other organizations that can help temporary foreign workers. For example, immigrants, refugees, and tell me what type of program do we have currently to support this kind of work? And to what extent would it be possible, if there aren't any, would it be possible to implement such a program? A short answer, please.
For that question, I would just say that one of the things that we also work at with ESDC are programs such as the Skills for Success program, which funds projects to develop and deliver skills training and assessment resources to help Canadians, and this absolutely includes also permanent residents, refugees, to improve their foundational and transferable skills. And this is to help them prepare for and to get ready for entering the job market. And so that's a way that we start even earlier on to get people ready to enter the job market. We're also looking at the sorts of wraparound supports that can be provided to workers, again, to enable them to get into the workforce and perhaps subsequently further upskill and reskill to move on to other jobs.
Thank you very much, Mr. Brown. Merci beaucoup, Monsieur Iacono. Prochainement, nous avons Monsieur.
Thank you very much, Mr. Iacono. Now we're over to Mr. Barcelo Duval. You have 6 minutes. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Well, first of all, welcome to Mr. Gionnet, Mr. Gillespie. It's a pleasure to see you here. I didn't have a chance to sit on the committee on immigration and citizenship. However, I have heard about your work, and I keep an eye on it, and I hear about it regularly in my riding office. One of my employees works almost full-time on immigration matters, and I find it to be a very peculiar situation because it's a riding office and not an immigration office, and yet people call us regularly. They're crying, they're discouraged for years. They've been waiting for their file to be processed, and they don't know what to do. We try to help them, but we can't do the job of the civil servant. So we're trying to understand this problem. Obviously, the files are not being processed quickly enough. Thank you for the question, Mr. Chair. Indeed, the fact that there is a backlog is recognized, and there's an action plan in place to try to bring down that backlog. As was mentioned at the beginning, there are a number of measures in place which include staffing and recruiting new employees to support us with processing applications. So by the end of this fall, we should employ or hire 1,250 more workers. And as I mentioned, in terms of study visas, work visas, and permanent residence applications, we're seeing progress. So the backlogs are going down. And I think it's relevant for this committee to note that since the beginning of this year, 552 work permits were issued to those who requested them. When you were saying that the turnaround times have improved, I think that's good news. I mean, I'm listening to you, and of course, I have to say that's positive, but I would like you to inform me a little more about the average response time. What are we talking about? Because some people who call me say that they've been waiting for years. So what would an average, processing time be for an application? Thank you for the question. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Well, it really depends. I can offer some stats to the committee on processing times. For example, for permanent residents, it depends on the level of immigration as tabled by the minister earlier this week. So we have to make sure that we process the files, and they have to line up with what we're able to produce. But for work permits, for example, there is no limit. So we're preparing to process the applications as they come in. But for example, for work permits, from the end of September, we're talking 116 days on average. Can you perhaps give me the information around when it's French applications, or is it similar, those processing times compared to English applications? I don't think I have that level of detail, but I could look into it and find out if that's available for you. Thank you. That would be very much appreciated to get that information. You were saying that you have a plan, and I'm happy to hear that. You said there's a plan in place to bring down that backlog. I'd like to hear a little more about that. What is your plan exactly to reduce the backlog? We're talking hundreds of thousands, maybe even millions of applications that are in that backlog. So what's a person, well, how exactly do you deal with that? I imagine it doesn't just happen, it doesn't get fixed overnight. Thank you for the question, Mr. Chair. It's difficult to give you broad responses given the variety of programs we offer. But a few examples, like Mr. Gillespie mentioned, if we talk about work permits, the postgraduate work permits, well, recently we used technological tools to extend work permits for people waiting for their permanent residency. So we're trying to find new ways to process applications. And so we're changing the processes. But we can't do that for all files. So it is important to make sure that we fill these positions with individuals who can help us to get back to expected processing times. Thank you for your answer. Maybe I'll turn towards Mr. Brown, Mr. McPhee, and Mr. Hickey. Well, beyond these applications, we've also got businesses complaining because they're not able to get their temporary foreign workers in. There seems to be blockages everywhere in the federal system. And unfortunately, these temporary foreign workers, well, these workers come back every year. They come back every year to work in the fields. They're seasonal workers. And even in other sectors, there's some applications for these workers, and yet the situation never improves. It's actually getting worse. So how is it possible that the situation is not improving? Unfortunately, you'll have to wait for the next round of questions. Mr. Barcelou-Duval.
Mr. Bachrach, the floor is yours. You have 6 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Brown, you mentioned that one of the areas that is a potential for bringing people into the transport sector labor market is groups who are currently underrepresented, including Indigenous people. Now, there's a whole suite of different barriers that Indigenous folks in Northwest BC face in terms of accessing the labor market, one of which is a lack of driver's license. And there's a woman named Lucy Sager from All Nations Driving Academy who's done some excellent research on the barriers to driver's licensing for Indigenous people in British Columbia, and I think a lot of the trends apply probably across Canada. I wonder if you're aware of this work, and if so, what you see as the role of the federal government in reducing barriers to driver's licensing for Indigenous entrants to the labor market.
Great, and thanks very much for that question. So I think very much one of the things that you've touched upon there is that, the desire to work to get underrepresented groups into the labor market, and here specifically thinking about into the transportation sector. And certainly for us, Indigenous people across the country would be one of those priority areas, and we're looking and already working with Indigenous groups to improve our skills and employment training. With respect to the specific study that you're referring to there and the challenges with respect to obtaining driver's licenses, so I'm not aware of the specifics there. But what I can say is that, some of our programming is directed towards preparing people to get ready for the labor market. And so there may be opportunities for work there, but certainly one of the other things that we do is through a number of programs, we're continuing to bring and build in a focus on further inclusion Indigenous groups as well as others represented in the labor market, and as well on wraparound supports. And this is really looking at the other things that people may need to help them be able to participate in the labor market. So there's ongoing work there, and certainly we'd be interested to know more about the barriers that are being faced in Indigenous communities. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Brown. Perhaps we can have Ms. Sager table a brief with the committee that could be considered as part of this report, because I do think it would be very relevant. My next question is for Ms. Vanstone. You mentioned marine training. I was in Prince Rupert this past weekend. Prince Rupert has seen a real expansion of employment in the marine sector, largely due to the expansion of the Port of Prince Rupert, but other activities surrounding that as well. And one thing I heard from people in the community, from unions, from other groups, is the need for a local marine training facility. Currently, people who want to access these jobs have to travel all the way to the Lower Mainland for training at their own expense, taking them away from their families and away from home. I wonder whether your department has thought about the addition of regional marine training centers, and whether the BC North Coast would be on the list as a candidate for one of those.
I appreciate the question, Mr. Chair. With respect to training, of course, it's important to understand that this is an area primarily a provincial jurisdiction. We work very closely as a federal government, of course, engage various levels with the provinces around training. From the perspective of Transport Canada, we are interested in engaging in more detailed conversations with our provincial counterparts to look at these kinds of questions, to ensure that we are doing what we can to have adequate training to meet the needs of the transportation sector. And I think what you raised about what has been raised here about the training being in particular areas is a very interesting question, and I think one that would be good for further conversation with our provincial and territorial counterparts.
Do I have more time, Mr. Chair?
Mr. Bachrach, you'll be glad to hear you have a minute and a half.
Oh, fabulous. Look at that. I'm getting more efficient. I think that's what's happening here. And efficiency, of course, allows us to be more productive. My next question is around the temporary foreign worker program. Mr. Gillespie, you talked about how the government is working to expedite and provide express entry for foreign nationals employed as truck drivers. This seems like a really positive move, certainly in line with what the NDP supports in terms of moving away from the temporary foreign worker program towards providing status for all foreign nationals who are working in our country and who are contributing to our economy. I'm just wondering why limit it to the trucking sector. There are so many sectors of our economy that are in need of additional labor, and what are the barriers to expanding this express entry to other sectors, either with other sectors within transport or other sectors throughout the economy?
So thanks so much for the question. So in this instance, what's happening is that the National Occupational Classification System that we and ESDC rely on to administer both temporary worker programming and permanent residence programming is moving to the next iteration, the most updated iteration so it's NOC 2021. And in so doing, the classifications are shifting, and the truck driver occupation that I mentioned is in particular shifting to become or to be deemed a higher skilled occupation. So the IRCC permanent residence programs governed under the express entry system aren't changing. It's simply that the occupations themselves are shifting around, and the occupational classification system has over 500 occupations, and there's a number of others that are actually being bumped up to become considered higher skilled occupations.
Thank you very much, Mr. Gillespie, and thank you, Mr. Bachrach. Next, we have Mr. Muse. Mr. Muse, the floor is yours. You have 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to all the witnesses for your time this afternoon. I want to pick up on the questions from Dr. Lewis and also from Monsieur Barcelou-Duval with regard to the backlog, because we just heard earlier in today's meeting from the National Supply Chain Task Force, and one of the things that they talked about was really the need for workers. they pointed to immigration and to temporary foreign workers as part of that solution. We heard that from many witnesses throughout the course of this study as well. And, you can't confirm that there's a 2.6 million case backlog. And the processing time, it seems to vary, or it depends. There's a lot of stats thrown out there. I heard 160 days. I heard 6 months. What is the service standard in terms of processing applications at IRCC?
Thank you for the question. And at the risk of repeating myself, it depends on the line of business. So we've listed service standards for a number of categories, and they range from 60 days to 6 months to 120 days. So it really depends on the business line. I think they're all available on the website, but we'd be happy to table them.
Are you achieving those service standards currently?
No, and that is so. For example, as to again focus on the work permit, which I think has been key to this conversation and this study. So currently, the service standard there is 60 days. As I mentioned, as of September, we're at 116 days. But the measures that we are taking in terms of staffing up, looking at efficiencies, are with a view to returning to that service standard early in 2023.
Is the department working at full capacity at the moment, and has it been over the last couple of years?
At full capacity.
In terms of staffing, ability to process applications?
So, the pandemic certainly impacted the ability for certain offices to operate as we did pre-pandemic, but certainly in the recent months, things are getting back to normal. For example, visa application centers overseas are operational. We did take steps.
So everyone's back at work. So let me ask the question that Monsieur Barcelou-Duval asked but ran out of time, and that is, how are things not improving?
So again, I do think there is improvement. We're not at the, for example, again, to go back at the 60-day work permit target. We are producing record numbers of work permit applications compared to recent statistics. And that is being achieved through the measures that I've mentioned in terms of the staffing, in terms of looking at the efficiencies, leveraging the technology, making sure we have online applications, we can move files around. So progress is being achieved, but it's not going to be an overnight fix to get back to 60 days.
So it's not an overnight fix. How do we up the urgency in what can the federal government or what can the department do to increase and expedite those applications? Because we heard that again from every witness so far in this study over the course of 6 meetings, that really needs to be ramped up. So what do we do? What can be done to really ramp that up quickly?
So again, it's the investments that I've mentioned that we're making in terms of looking at the processes, streamlining, hiring staff. As the minister announced, it's the permanent residence levels are going up. So that means we can land additional permanent residents year over year, and that will help ensuring that there are employees and workers who are selected by the provinces, for example, to meet those labor market demands.
Let me ask Transport Canada, because we've heard over the course of this study, 28,000, 30,000 truck drivers short, 58,000 employees short in the air sector over the course of the next decade. I think it was 50,000 in the marine sector, the rail sector as well. So these are startling numbers. Is Transport Canada concerned about this labor shortage and the growing gap?
15-second response, please.
Yes, we are, and that's why we've put in place the 4-point strategy I mentioned in my opening remarks, and intend to work very closely with our federal counterparts and provinces and territories and industry
is
to
enough
address
is enough
this
being
issue.
done? I mean, a website and reviewing recommendations is not really much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Muse, and thank you, Ms. Vanstone. Lastly, today we have Mr. Badaway. Mr. Badaway, the floor is yours. You have 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I just want to say to Mr. Bachrach that come on down to Niagara. We're building that kind of facility. That's going to be an innovation and training facility that will be preparing and training. No, it's not portable, but they would love Niagara. You know, they can come down and enjoy the falls, enjoy the wineries and all that, and the beaches, and of course they can go right next door to Leslin's area and Haldeman, beautiful area. Anyway, now that I wasted 10, 15 seconds, I wanted to expand on my earlier questions to these individuals that we have on the screen. And I'll say this, you know, the preface to my question is the fact that, you know, yesterday's drivers and operators are today's transportation specialists. You know, no longer is someone just driving a truck or captaining and piloting a marine vessel or so on and so forth. They're actually looking after, through efficiencies and effectiveness, real-time decision-making, whether it's the product or the cargo that they're carrying, the data management that they're managing en route. They're giving companies and customers more effectiveness, more fairness, and with that, more efficiencies. So I guess my question is this. Is it fair to say that yesterday's drivers, and I'm going to repeat the question I had earlier, yesterday's drivers, engineers, captains, pilots, while moving goods, are tomorrow's transportation specialists? Operators, yes, but equally as important, they're data and logistics managers, trained to offer additional corporate and customer value, as I mentioned earlier. And do you feel that with our nation's ratified trade agreements within the last 3 or 4 years, our population is 38 million people, and some would think that's small, but frankly, our economic population is over 1.8 billion with a B, which places us within the top through economic population in the world. So therefore, do we integrate, and someone mentioned it earlier, I think it was Mr. Gillespie, do we integrate within this group of trading partners distribution logistics, data analysis, leading to integrated transportation management, and therefore up-to-date transportation specialists, not just drivers, but transportation specialists, and therefore trained in that manner? So I'll throw that question out to all of you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, for the question. I'll start off and I'll invite my colleagues to join. I think from the perspective of Transport Canada, we do see that there is constant introduction of new technologies and change in the transportation sector that are driving changes in the skill requirements for many different occupations in the transportation sector. So I believe to some extent that statement does ring true, that there are ongoing evolution of skills and requirements for people to participate in these careers. Also, I would mention that Transport Canada, it has made some investments already through budget 2022, 163.3 million is being invested over 5 years to develop a modern digital analytics-driven approach to support supply chain optimization, improve asset and traffic management, and foster resiliency and improve coordination across the modes of transportation. And so we are, I think, recognizing these issues and taking steps in that broader context. And I welcome any others who would like to join, add on to that response.
Any other comments?
So perhaps Andrew Brown, the SDC, just to add in there briefly, I think that would just say that we recognize that, it is the sectors themselves that are well placed to speak to what some of the needs are. And that's one of the reasons that we're complementing some of the broader programs that we've got with the sectoral workforce solutions program. This is something that is going to be funding sectoral projects, and it will really be helping to employers and workers in particular sectors. We've gone out with a call for proposals. This is currently in the assessment process, so we're going to have to see which proposals will be funded, but we hope that we're going to be able to announce in the coming months, projects that will be specific for and led by people in particular sectors, such as the transportation sector. So this would be a way to leverage some of the expertise that's within different parts of the transportation sector in terms of informing skills and employment programming.
Thank you very much, Mr. Brown, and thank you, Mr. Badaway. That concludes the questioning for today. On behalf of all committee members, I want to thank our witnesses for their time and sharing their expertise with us. That concludes the meeting. It is adjourned.